Okay, Allison, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Wonderful. Okay, good to see you again. How are you?
Fabulous on this Friday, so it's nice to see you again too.
Yes, definitely. It's a little bit later in the day. I know we started bright and early on our first conversation, so a little bit later, you've gotten your day going.
Yeah, my latte's finished, so I'm on to water now.
Okay, me too. Yep, me too. Well, good. So let's just hang out for another minute or so and let some people join, and then we'll dive into the conversation. But I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, me too. Happy that Sean is coming on. That's super exciting. And I love that you're on the East Coast and we're on the West Coast, so we're kind of anchoring the whole nation. I'm hoping you get some folks from all over, not just from certain regions. So I've done some outreach. Hopefully we get lots of folks on the call. That would be really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I hope so too. I know I've been putting it out to friends and family and everywhere. This is I think this is kind of a neat opportunity. It's a little unique to get a chat like this going, a little behind the scenes, a little making of Instant Family, and so this is gonna be fun. I'm so glad that Sean joined us. So thank you for.
Yeah. Well, it's my favorite thing to talk about, and I think it's one of Sean's favorite things to talk about too. So, he's going to be jumping on in about 15 minutes. So, how awesome is that?
Very, very awesome. Well, good. Well, let's dive in. I hope we have a group on here now, and we've got some people watching and getting ready to have a conversation with us. So it's going to be exciting. So, Allison, let me kind of set this up a little bit. So before we get into it, so for those of you that are on here that I've never met before, my name is Matt Anderson. I'm the Vice President of Programs and Business Development for the Children's Home Society of North Carolina, and I'm here in Greensboro, North Carolina. And Allison, you are joining us for what is usually our A Place to Call Home fundraiser series that we do in the springtime in Greensboro, Raleigh, and Charlotte. And normally you'd be here in person with us. You'd be on stage talking about the movie Instant Family and your work and telling stories about that film and family. And obviously we can't do that this year. Just like everybody else, we are, dealing with the coronavirus as well, which means we're not going to bring 1,000 people together in a room. Instead, we're going to go virtual. We're going to go live on Facebook today and do our annual fundraiser that way. So we're going to get into the conversation here, but just know that as you watch this and hear these stories about the movie Instant Family and about the work of Children's Home Society, please know that you can help the Children's Home Society continue to operate its programs and do great work for kids and families and continue to live our mission, which is to promote the right of every child to a permanent, safe, and loving family. It's what we do every day. It's who we are. It's why we exist. And you can go to chsnc.org/stay home, and that's our link to where you can make a contribution to the work of the Children's Home Society. So I know you'll do that. We appreciate it. We thank you. We can't do this without you. And so Allison, I'll ask you to introduce yourself, and then we'll get into some questions about Instant Family. And then I know the director of the film, Sean Anders, is going to join us in a little bit. And you and Sean are going to share an exciting announcement about what you all are doing next. And so you've told me a little bit about it. Very excited about it. I know it's in the works and coming soon. And so can't wait for you guys to talk about that a little bit. So without further ado, why don't you introduce yourself and then we can jump in.
Yeah. For folks that don't know me, I'm Allison Davis Maxon. I'm the executive director for the National Center on Adoption and Permanency, the consultant for the movie Instant Family, and kind of more importantly, really passionate about this thing called foster care and child welfare, and especially passionate about kids that get stuck in long-term foster care. Those group of kids, it's about 1 in 6 that's been in the system more than 5 years. There's a whole group of kids that once they get in, they don't get out of a system, and they spend their childhood kind of stuck inside that system. So it's one of the reasons why in Instant Family, we wanted to make sure that we're kind of telling the story of the Lizzie character, who was our teen our teenager in foster care, telling her story in a really real way and an impactful way, showing her strength and resilience, because you don't always see that story out in the world, in the community, especially when it's connected to foster care and child welfare. So when Children's Home Society reached out, I was really excited to participate, because with the theme of storytelling, how we tell the story of youth in care, that it isn't just, telling the parents' story, foster parents or adoptive parents or kinship parents, but really making room and space and a platform for children and youth to tell their own story, because we've been telling a pretty limited, narrow story. So Sean's vision of creating a movie that really featured a real story of a teen, of a sibling set kind of stuck in foster care, and not just kind of the tragedy and the hard parts of that story, but the full story where you see real fleshed out characters, just became this kind of passion project. And again, I was kind of lucky to land that gig. So I'm super excited to be here and have this conversation with everybody.
And we're excited to have you here, Allison. Obviously, but we go back about 10 or 11 years. We've known each other, and I've just known your passion for this work, but particularly your passion for engaging with people who have lived the experience of foster care and really giving them a voice and helping their stories to get out into the world. And you've done that in so many different ways, and it's great. So I can't wait to hear more about that today. And before I ask you a question, we have a lot of people on watching. We have people from Louisiana, from Florida, from California. Allison, I think your husband's on here watching, so your family's here. Super cool. So thank you all for being on here with us. And we want this to be dynamic as much as we can. So please, in the comments, if you have a question that you want to ask Allison or Sean when he comes on here, please do, and we'll try to get to some of those. So if you have a question about a particular scene that you want to know the backstory on, or a character, or one of the actors in the film, or why Sean wanted to make this film as a director, please chime in, and we'll try to get a conversation going. And maybe to start, Allison, how did you get this gig? You are in California, but you're not a Hollywood person. You're not a film.
Yeah.
You're not a. How did this?
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I landed the gig of the century for most therapists and social workers in the field. That's the number one question I get when I go anywhere is, how the hell did you get that gig? And it was a pretty amazing kind of moment where, I was the regional executive director for an organization called Kinship Center. And I had fielded a lot of calls through the years for make this reality show, and all of that seems really exploitive to us. So I'd always said no, which is what you do. You just always say no. But this time it was actually Sean calling me directly, and he said, "Listen, I've written a script. I'm a dad, an adoptive dad. I adopted 3 children from foster care." And for me, that's when I really started listening, like, okay, he's got lived experience. And when he said who he was and what he'd done, I immediately Googled him, like, who is this guy? And he had done Daddy's Homes, and he'd written a number of movies, really good movies. And so I felt like, oh my gosh, that he's legit, like he could write a good script and really bring this story, which is what he said on the initial call. He said, I can make a movie that brings the story of foster care to adoption to the world. And that immediately was appealing to me, because one of the other things he said on that original call is, "Allison, all of you guys in the field are kind of telling the wrong story." And I went, "What do you mean telling the wrong story?" He goes, "Well, you only tell parts of the story, and you tell kind of through the stereotype or the challenging parts, like the darker parts of the story, but you don't often tell that full story of strength and resilience and trauma to triumph. Like, you're not telling the full story." And he said, "That's what I'm passionate about, like really being able to tell the whole story and not just kind of parts of the story."
So that's really interesting. And now that makes me think, maybe from your point of view, so you're somebody working in the field, um, and now you're engaged with a filmmaker who's making a movie about the work that you do. But why story? Why engage with the idea of storytelling as, maybe part of your work as a social worker?
Yeah.
Why drew you to that?
Do you know, for me, Matt, one of the things is what I do in the work that I do. Like we're all on this journey to create our story and tell our story. Like we're living our story, each of us. It's really, what we've been doing, I think, since the beginning of time. Like we are creating our own life story. So when I'm sitting in front of someone, whether it's a child or a teen or a couple or a family, I'm listening for their story, how they tell their story, how they live their story. So storytelling, I think, is the most powerful vehicle that we have. It's actually why we go to the movies. We're all fascinated by stories and storytelling. And for me, when Sean started speaking to the power of story and how we in the field in particular are doing a disservice to this story, that we haven't been able to take the story of foster care and permanency to kind of the broader national narrative or speak to people's hearts in the right way. He often said you scare the hell out of people when you tell the wrong story or parts of the story, is maybe why we don't have more foster parents coming forward, or we're not creating a platform for youth and our alumni from foster care to tell their story, We often co-opt their story and we tell their story as opposed to having them tell their story. So it's why having the Lizzie character in the movie was so important, and so much effort went into making sure we got her story, the arc of her character right. That became really important to show her strength and her resilience through that movie.
It so that's great to hear, and it resonates a lot with me. So I'm with Children's Home Society of North Carolina right now, and have been for 8 years, and it's an amazing organization to work with. But we also just do amazing work too for kids and families. But as you know, I also made a feature documentary called "From Place to Place" about America's foster care system from the point of view of 3 kids who aged out, and so the power of story just really resonates, and it's a big part of what we do in our work at Children's Home Society, in a lot of different ways. But oftentimes it's just to build the awareness of what is going on in our communities with kids and families, and how can people help. And we have to tell redemptive stories of resilience and strength and hope and optimism, coupled with the challenges and the struggles. But it's the combination that I think allows people to see how they can get involved and be part of something. And we found that to be a really powerful way to do our work, which is part of why I'm excited to have this conversation with you too, because it's just an extension of that. And you talked about Lizzie, and I'm seeing in the comments here, somebody from Florida, I believe, asked a question about how involved were family and children with lived experience who have experienced foster care actually in the writing of the film. So maybe you could talk about that.
Well, and at every turn, youth were involved, alumni, youth, and foster parents, kinship parents, adoptive parents, birth parents. We had at every part, especially during the creation of the script. The script, by the way, evolved over years, through research, that the two co-writers, John Morris and Sean Anderson, Sean Anders wrote the script together. And Sean Anders is an adoptive dad who adopted 3 siblings from foster care. So that lived experience for him became really important. It's why it was his passion project. But one of the things he knew he needed to do was really sit with a lot of youth, folks with lived experiences, and hear their stories, how they experienced the system, the challenges, the triumphs, the resilience, so he could get that character right. That part of it became for me what made it resonate so deeply. The support group scenes, which we often hear from foster parents and adoptive parents, like those are some of their favorite scenes. And those scenes developed because Sean and John came into a support group that I've been facilitating for 12 years now. They came into that group, I think 3 different times. And one of the things that Sean and John would say when they left, like, they laugh so much. I can't believe how much they laugh. Like, they'll go from crying and really difficult things that they're sharing, and then they're laughing, like the levity and the joy as they're, going through all of the difficult experiences that they have. So much of what you see, all the scenes in the movie come from real lived experience. And I think it is why it resonates so deeply with folks that have lived experience in foster care and adoption and kinship.
It's what's interesting about that for Sean and John to have that experience in the support groups, to see the mix of emotion, right? Which is true. The work that we do, that you and I and so many others do, it's difficult work. We're dealing with the real challenges that people face and that families face, and it can be heavy, but it's lightened with humor often, and I think that's important. And it's interesting because that shows up in the film too, right? Throughout the course of family, you're just seeing that balance of the pain,
Yes.
the light, and the humor, and the love, and the
Yes.
sad.
Can I share something funny connected to that,
Yeah.
Matt? One of the funny experiences Sean and I had in a number of the screenings, like one of the first places we screened it was just to a regular audience in Long Beach, California. So we screened it there, and these were just people off the streets. And they laughed, and we got great reviews, and but when we took it, and we took it a few weeks later to the NACAC conference, which is the North American Council on Adoptable Children. So we had a whole theater filled with our kids from care, our alumni, foster parents, adoptive parents. The theater was filled to the brim with those folks. And they went nuts for it, like standing ovation, like crazy, hollering, like belly laughing. And the difference was, and Sean and I talked about this later, folks with lived experience that movie in a very different way than folks from the outside in. Like, folks that don't have the lived experience will often see something funny and go, oh, can we laugh at that? Like the bedroom scene where Pete and Ellie are going, can we give them back? Like, we're so overwhelmed. Like, how do we get out of this? Like, they're drowning, right? Because they're overwhelmed. And in that moment, the average person goes, oh my gosh, like, how could they say that? Like, what parent would say that? Like, if you've never been a foster parent or an adoptive parent, you may not understand the real overwhelming feelings that go into, like, maybe I'm not good enough to be parenting this kid because I feel like I might be failing this kid, or I feel so overwhelmed. Like, the average person may not understand that, but our parents went like nuts for that because that's a real experience. So it's why coming in, if Sean and John hadn't come into our support group meetings over and over again, I think they would have missed some of those nuances that became so important. And again, it's why it resonates so deeply with folks that have lived experience.
I think we have Sean not on quite yet, but about to join us. So we're probably going to transition here with him in a second. So for everybody listening, again, please share your comments, questions, thoughts in the chat. We're watching it. So if you have a question for Sean or Allison, please feel free. We'd love to hear you. So Sean, it looks like you are on here. I hope you can hear us. Okay, great. Hi.
Hello.
Hey, Sean.
Welcome. Thank you for being here. We were just chatting back and forth about your experience, I guess, early in the writing of the film, joining Allison's support groups and seeing the kind of the ups and downs of the emotions, the tears, the laughter. And I was saying how much you can see that translate throughout the course of the film, where you see all of those emotions, and it makes it so real and authentic. And just thank you for what you did, Sean, to make this film and to do it in such a real, authentic way. I think it speaks to all of us who do the work, but it also speaks to the people that don't know about foster care. It speaks to the people that don't know about organizations like Kinship Center or Children's Home Society of North Carolina, and really engages them in what this is all about. And so we love it, and we love you for it. And I thought maybe to kind of join you into the conversation, you're an adoptive father, so you know this. You and your wife adopted 3 kids from foster care, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about that and your family, and why this film became something you were so passionate about.
Well, first of all, I not only did the research part of the support groups, but my wife and I were in one of those support groups for probably about the first 2 years of after the kids came to us. So we also had our own firsthand experience with our own support group as well, and yeah, it was this was the kind of thing where. I think it had been, I'm trying to think of how many years Beth and I were into this process before. It was actually my writing partner, John Morris, who said, maybe we should do something on this topic. And the reason why he brought it up is because he said, before you started telling me about this, I didn't know anything about how any of this stuff worked. And I said, yeah, before I got into it, I didn't know anything about how it worked. Like, I thought there was an outside chance that when we went to the orientation, they might try to send us home with some kids. Like, that's how little I knew about the whole, experience ahead of going into it. So I thought, yeah, that would be great if we could make a movie that would educate people a little bit more about, how this works. But from the very beginning, and this is, I think, the main thing that we wanted to talk about today, that I just thought, I don't want to make another one of those gut-wrenching dramas. I mean, first of all, I don't make dramas, I make comedies, but I feel like so many of the stories that surround foster care are, even some of the great ones that I think we really need. Not that I'm saying everything should be sugar coated or peaches and cream or anything, but I think that so often the focus is so specific on the dysfunction and the trauma and all of that, that nobody sees anything else. That they just, and it causes people to be very sort of charity minded around the whole thing. And I thought it was important to make a movie that touched on all that and didn't shy away from it, but that also got into the laughter and the love and the positives that are involved, because there've been a lot of positives in my life. I mean, even right now with this coronavirus thing, it's been, you know, it's I'm a pretty busy guy, and this is really the first time, I was gonna say in years, but actually, if I'm being honest, ever, that I've had every single meal with my family for the last month, and it's been phenomenal. And so there are so many amazing positives and pluses, and that we wanted to make sure that that was a part of the story.
Yeah. And how often, I just want to add this with Sean. Sean, how often in the beginning were you saying, Allison, you guys are telling the wrong story? Like you're schooling me repeatedly until I'm like, okay, I got it. Like we're only telling a portion of the
Well,
story.
yeah, and I think Allison, in your work, you were so, you were wanting to get a lot of these messages out, because there are so many desperate situations, whether it's in the courts or
Mhm.
in the lack of foster and adoptive parents that we have, and just there are so many things that are so difficult, and dysfunctional about the system, that I think when we were first talking, Allison was educating me about all of this stuff, and I was trying to, again, just strike a balance. We knew that the movie wouldn't work if it felt like it was just this sugar coated, if
Yeah.
it felt fake. But at the same time, my own personal experience with it was, there was a lot of negative to it for sure, but it certainly wasn't all negative. And for me personally, it was more positive than negative. And the first time, that the thing that really, really sold me on doing this was that when we went through our classes, in fact, this is a good thing to talk about for this forum. When we went through our classes, the last day, I think it was after 8 weeks, the last day was a panel discussion with adoptive parents that had gone through what we had gone through and fostered kids and then adopted. And I think it went on for 3 hours, and it was absolutely riveting. I mean, like, heartbreaking, uplifting, tears. Uh, I would have sat there for another 3 hours gladly and listened to more of their stories. It was so interesting and entertaining, and like I said, heartbreaking and uplifting and all of that. And it made me think, they should have started, they should have opened with this. They should have started, and that's why in the film, the first thing that happens at the orientation is that they hear a real story from a real person in their orientation, because that's how I would like it to be. I would like people to hear these stories, because the thing that really struck me was that there were a few couples on that panel discussion who described some really horrific, difficult, really tough situations. And everybody emphatically said, best thing I've ever done.
Mhm.
Don't regret it at all. Some tough times, but embraced it fully. And that's what I needed to hear personally, was like, okay, even if this is hard, I want to be one of those people that says, okay, yeah, this was hard, but I'm glad I did it. And I'm glad, and so that the vibe and the emotion of that panel discussion is what I wanted to capture in the movie. Because, by the way, that panel discussion was also really funny, like a lot of laughter through tears at that panel discussion. So that's what I wanted to capture in the movie, was something that covered all of it, that was funny and heartfelt, but again, didn't shy away from the heartbreak and the trauma and all of that.
Sean, we had a question come up in the chat just a second ago that might be kind of fun for people to hear about, which is, I think it's true that the family and the three kids in the movie are not totally dissimilar from your own family, right? And so I think the question was, how do your kids see this film, and what kind of involvement did they have, or kind of what's their take on it now that it's out in the world?
Well, they are not the. To be clear, the Pete and Ellie characters, as much as I'd like to say Mark Wahlberg was playing me, that none of the characters are. It's still fiction based on my family and a lot of other families that I met with along the way. And the biggest example of that is the Lizzie character, where um, my wife and I really did go to one of those adoption fairs early on, and we really did meet a teenage girl who had a brother and sister, and we really did put them on our list and were matched with them. But in our real story, what happened was this girl who was 16 at the time had decided that their mother was still coming for them, and went to her brother and sister and said, we can't do this. And it's a long story, but basically it was scuttled, and we did everything that we could, which was not really much of anything, but we did what we could to try to make it happen, and it didn't happen. And then what happened was, we got a call from our social workers a short time after saying, well, there's these other three kids who were different ages. So our kids were 6, 3, and a year and a half when we met them. And but when it came time to make the movie, we didn't want to I really wanted to involve a teenager, and I never forgot that girl. So Lizzie was based on that one time that we met this girl in this park, and what little we knew about her, but then also based on other young women that we met with through Allison, who had been adopted from foster care. But to answer your question, our kids were actually really helpful. As you know, I remember coming in. I remember when John first suggested the idea of doing it, and I came in and I was having dinner with my family and told them, hey, we were just talking about maybe making a movie about this, and everybody was laughing and talking about it. And I said, look, we're going to have to start thinking, because it had been, I think we were at least 4 years in at that point. So we said, we're going to have to start really thinking hard and talking about how, uh, going through our memories and our feelings and all of that. And my family was really helpful in all of that. And my poor kids they've seen the movie like 1,000 times now, because they came with me to a lot of screenings and everything like that. But they did actually recently. We were looking for something to watch one night. My daughter said, "Let's watch Instant Family," and I said, "No, I can't. I need a break from that one now."
I'm not there yet, Sean. I can still watch it over and over and over again. So I'm not there.
Oh, Matt,
Oh.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry, man. I can't. Can
Yeah.
you hear him, Allison?
No, he's
Can you
been
hear me
muting
now?
his phone so we don't
Oh,
get feedback.
there you go.
You got me
Okay, I
now?
can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm having I think some connection issues too here. So anyway, no, love those stories, and it made me wonder just quickly. And then I wanted to ask kind of a different question. Do your kids have a favorite scene in the movie?
They, the funny thing is, they really like the scene where Pete and Ellie are talking about getting rid of the kids. They just think that
Did
it's
that
hilarious.
happen? Did
So
you guys say that?
well,
Yeah,
when they first,
yeah, right. Yeah, that's
asked,
probably
they
what they're
were like,
wondering.
"Did that ever happen?" I said, "Oh yeah." I said, "Way worse than what we could
Yeah,
portray
we
in
were
the
there.
movie." And but no, they love all the stuff with the kids and with Lizzie, and yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that was really nice about it, was that my kids were willing to sit through the movie over and over again and talk about different parts of it, and they've answered a lot of questions. They've actually even been up on some of the panels, so it's been fun for them.
So, Sean, I'm just kind of following the chat a little bit too here as we talk, and there's a lot of people on here that either work somewhere in foster care and really all over the country, or are foster parents, and a lot of comments about thank you, and it's so real, and this resonates, and it's so authentic, and job well done, and they're really neat to see that. And but I wonder, maybe we go like behind the scenes a little bit. So for either of you all, how does a movie like this get made? I mean, Mark Wahlberg was obviously a big piece of this. I think, Sean, you've worked with him in the past, and I've started watching the TV, kind of the reality show that his family has, and you can see that it's a huge deal to him, and the relationship with his mom and his brothers, and kind of how he grew up as a kid, and so I just wonder how much he was drawn to this film because of his own family experiences, and but yeah, how does that all happen, and how did this one
Well,
come?
Mark is, I mean, I if anybody loves this movie, they have to give so much of the credit to Mark, because I thought when we started writing this, I thought, well, there's a good chance that this is going to have to be a smaller movie, that this is going to have to be kind of a labor of love, a low budget, that we just won't get a big studio to release this thing on 3,000 screens, because of the subject matter. It's what I wanted, but you have to accept certain realities. Nobody in this movie, nobody's flying around in a cape, So the but I wanted Mark to be in it, and I sent him this email that I wrote and rewrote and rewrote. I think I did more drafts of that email than I did of the script. And I stayed up really late, and I finally pressed send at like 2 o'clock in the morning. And Mark called me back like the next morning at about 8 o'clock in the morning and just said yes, and just said, yeah, I got your email. And he said, you know how early I get up, right? And Mark gets up at like 4:30 in the morning or something ridiculous. And he said, I've been waiting to call for a decent hour to call you back and just say I'm in. Like, send me the script when it's ready. But and Mark had, through his various organizations and such, he had met with a lot of kids in foster care, and Mark, came from, a fairly rough background himself, and so he was very into it from the beginning. And the thing that is why that's so huge is because when a movie star, especially a movie star of Mark's caliber, says yes to your movie, and then you, instead of going in and saying, hey, we have this kind of weird little comedy about foster care adoption, you can kind of go in and say, hey, we have this amazingly commercial project starring Mark Wahlberg. And all of a sudden everybody listens a lot more clearly. So it was really great. And then we were able to take it to Paramount, the studio that we did the Daddy's Home movies with Mark at, and we took it to Paramount. And there's a guy who was still relatively new running Paramount, named Jim Giannopoulos, and he called me, which is, it's rare to get a call from, there are studio heads that run the production, the film side of things, and then there's the guy who runs the whole shebang, and that was Jim Giannopoulos. And even as a filmmaker, you don't deal with people in his position that much directly. I think on the Daddy's Home movies, there were other people in his position that I think I met them, maybe once or twice during the process of those two movies. Anyway, Jim called me right away and said, will you walk me through this? And I told him my story, and I told him the story we wanted to tell. And he said, this sounds great. And he also, the thing I never forget about Jim is that I wasn't sure about the name Instant Family. I mean, it was very descriptive, but I was always worried it was a little hokey or something. And he said, you know what I love? I love that title, Instant Family. I get it right away, Instant Family. So that was such a huge relief to me that the people at the very top, the people who really get movies made, the head of Paramount and a guy like Mark Wahlberg and his producer Lev, they were all in from the beginning. And that's how this thing got, we owe them a great deal of gratitude for getting this movie out there.
Yeah, no, it's a big deal, and it's a cool story to kind of hear how that came to be, and congratulations on it all. What I learned is that the only thing I have in common with Mark Wahlberg probably is that we both wake up at 4:30 in the morning. So
I wake up at 4:30 in the morning too, except I go back to sleep.
Right? Yeah, exactly. But I go to bed at 9 o'clock at night to be able to do that. So it's an interesting existence. But no, and I think I love the title too. I mean, it just works. But I think it resonates with so many people from the jump too, because family is just, I mean, it's so fundamental, right? I mean, we all relate to it, and we all know how important it is. And telling stories about family is a big deal. It's something we do a lot at Children's Home Society. I mean, we have a videographer on staff. And so we're telling stories oftentimes, really just documenting stories of people just like Lizzie, right? So Lizzie's a teenage girl waiting in foster care, parental rights terminated. What's going to happen? Where am I going to be? Where am I going to go? So we'll film a short little story about her, and who is she, and what is she all about? What does she love? What does she not like? What does she want to be when she grows up? What does family mean to her? What does she want in family? And then we use that as part of a strategy to find the right family for her, so that she doesn't have to age out. And it's another way to engage with the voice of young people and empower them to speak their truth so that they can have the best opportunities possible. And Sean, we teased at the beginning here that you and Allison are working on kind of a next project. And so I want to remind people of that. Stay tuned. We're going to ask you guys to talk about that here in a second, of what you're up to next, which is super exciting. And Allison, maybe any kind of behind the scenes story that you want to share about maybe one of the actors or one of the scenes or your role, or that really stands out?
Well, I had so many amazing moments. One of the funny moments, at least for me, and I think probably Sean enjoyed this, at least I think he did, because I have no connection to movie making, producing, like never been on a set ever in my life, ever. And I get to the set the morning of, it was Monday morning, and I'm just thinking, I'm coming on and it's a big production. Like, you can't even get onto the set because there's security. I mean, it's a Mark Wahlberg movie, right? So I get there and they go, "Oh, you're Allison." I said, "Yeah, I'm just the consultant." And they go, "Oh, we'll go to costumes because we're going to dress you." And I'm like, "Costumes? You're not dressing me. Like, I'm just going to go talk to Sean or something." And so he goes, "Well, let me see." Because I said, "Oh, no, I'm not in the movie." And they called Sean. And I think Sean in that moment thought it was kind of funny to be like, "Oh, no, we're going to put her in the scene." So my funny moment was like, I'm going to be in a scene? And the amusing part of that was, again, Sean's humor, like, "Oh, let's put Allison in the scene where she's the one that can't make it because it gets too heavy too quickly. So that couple that gets up and leaves the orientation is actually Allison and her on the set husband, who get up and walk out, like that walk of shame, like, yeah, this is too much for us, too overwhelming." So that was a great moment for me, because it was one of those like, what, I'm going to be in it today? But it was really fun to do. And I think Sean enjoys those little surprises that he has for folks.
Yeah, that was funny. It was fun to watch her walk out of that meeting 500 times over the course of 2 days.
There's also a good story about Octavia and how you landed Octavia. Sean, if you want to speak to that, because that was kind of fun. I think most social workers, professionals in the field, loved that they had Octavia and Tig as the dynamic duo playing off of each other, but that's a neat story.
Well, my real social workers at Kinship Center weren't the Octavia and Tig characters, Karen and Sharon, weren't based on my social workers, apart from the fact that my social workers could not have been any more different between the two of them. One was very kind of mousy and sweet and just said everything with a smile, and the other one was a lot more acerbic and kind of tough and pushy. And so that was the dynamic for the characters. What that would inspired that. But we knew that we needed somebody who could play the social worker who kind of says the things she's not always supposed to say out loud, and and doesn't exactly that. We wanted one who was sort of very, very professional, maybe to a fault, and the other one that's maybe a little too loose to a fault. And that was really our idea with the characters. And we needed somebody who could pull that off and who could say some tough things and you'd still love her. And we went to Octavia not thinking that, we would, have much of a shot at getting her. And we ended up getting a meeting with her, and we sat down with her, and I had stayed up all night writing my sales pitch to Octavia that I was going to, attack her with when she got there. And before I could even start, she came in and she sat down and she said, "Let me just say, I want to do this movie. I love this, and I really want to be in this." And I said, "Great." I'm not gonna say anything to screw it up then. And when I got in the car right after we left, John and I were actually on our way to the airport to go to Atlanta to scout for the movie. And I remember we got in the car to the airport, and I called Mark Wahlberg and told him we got Octavia Spencer, and Mark was super excited too.
Yeah.
And it was such a big moment. And then for Tig, we auditioned a lot of people, and we saw a lot of great people, and we kept sort of changing this character and playing with this character and trying to figure out who it was. And then I was in Atlanta at that point, and I don't know why Tig popped into my head all of a sudden. But I knew her from her stand-up and all that, but I didn't know her personally. And I just thought, oh my God, she opposite Octavia could be really funny. And I think within a week we had her on board, and then we just had our perfect social workers. And I think it's a lot of people, even people who are outside the field or outside of, who don't know anything about foster care, love those characters.
I did, and Allison will laugh at me for this because we've talked about this a couple times, but one of my favorite scenes and characters and actors in the film is at the very end with Joan Cusack. And I know there's a story to her getting involved in the project too. But that last scene, and then going into the house for pie at the end. And High Fidelity is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
she does a great job in that one as well. But
we pushed really hard to get her. It was tough to get her because she does, it was essentially a cameo, and she lives in Chicago, and she has her family there and all of that. And I think when she first got the message about it, it was like, "Hey, do you want to go and do a day on this movie and just do a cameo?" And I think her initial reaction was, "No, not really." So then I contacted her and made this really emphatic plea of like, "Would you please come and do this? We need you so much for this, and we will take really good care of you." And she came out, and we had her for a day. And the funny story there is that we couldn't make the schedules work out to get Joan Cusack and Octavia on the same day. So when you see them interacting at the end of the scene, that's all movie magic. They weren't there. We had doubles for Octavia and Tig that you just see. So if you look really closely when they walk, the one shot that they're all together and the shot and they're walking past, if you look closely, you can kind of tell it's not really Octavia and Tig that are walking past her. And I sometimes I don't want to tell this story because it sort of blows the magic for people, but it also goes to show you how good they all are that when Octavia was responding about the pie and all that, she was actually responding to me. I was calling out to her, and then she was just walking off camera. And the other funny thing about that was that when we started screening the movie, Octavia's line about, I love pie just murdered with the audience. And I never really thought it was that funny of a line. I mean, it was just something that Octavia said on the day. It wasn't in the script or anything. In fact, the whole pie thing was just something I was just yelling stuff out to Octavia because we shot their part of it first. So I was yelling out to Octavia and Tig, hey, do you guys want to come in? I made a pie. I just yelled that out. And then we were like, why is everybody laughing so hard? We didn't realize that people were connecting that to the help. And it
Yeah.
wasn't intended that way from me. And I honestly don't think it was intended that way from Octavia either. But
Yeah.
everybody thought, oh, they threw in this little meta joke from the help. And we were like, great, we'll take a huge laugh where we can get it. But that's not really, the idea there. But
That's hilarious.
just happenstance.
And that I see Ashley Rhodes Quarter here on the chat. She loved that scene and that connection to the help too. So, Sean, you're super busy right now, I know, and I know you're in the middle of some things. Do you have a few more minutes? Are you okay on time to?
Yeah, no, I'm okay. We're actually moving, so I'm in this weird situation where I was moving my family right before this coronavirus thing hit, but we're moving to Colorado, so we went up to Colorado for spring break, and when we went up there, things got crazy, and then our original intention was that we were going to go up there for spring break, come back, the kids were going to finish out the school year, and then we were going to move properly this summer. But we got up there for spring break, and then we were sort of sheltering in place for a month. We ended up having to get an RV in order to get back to LA so that we could get more of our stuff so that we could move properly. And so that's what we're in the process of doing. We filled up one of those pods, and this weekend we get back in our RV and we shelter in motion on our way up to Colorado.
Right.
So,
Well, good luck on the move. Colorado is an amazing place. I lived in Montana for a long time and would spend time in Colorado. So it's, beautiful.
Yeah.
I wonder, Allison, how do you want to do this? Do you want to talk a little bit about what you all are doing next? I think it's super exciting and thrilled to see it come to life when it does. So love for you to talk about it.
Yeah, let me jump in and then I'll have Sean jump in. One of the things that as we kind of screened the film everywhere, and we really did specific outreach to the child welfare foster care community. So everywhere we went, we met parents and alumni. We just met a lot of folks, and it was amazing the people, the alumni that were really touched by the movie, and especially the Lizzie character. And we kept hearing kind of all these, I know Sean did as well, these kind of thank yous for, kind of telling that story in the way it was told, like the real story, the full story, her strength, her resilience. So it had us talking really ever since all of that about the things that we're still not doing well nationally within the system. That some of what's happened is that, professionals and agencies and foster parents, we've kind of co-opted the narrative in foster care, like the narrative that's still not told, and there isn't really kind of a platform for that, is alumni to kind of tell their story their way. It's often other folks telling their story. So we've connected to these amazing folks all across the nation. We have this national team of alumni, and we're creating a nonprofit called Foster Strong. And it's this national team that is kind of ready and willing and able to kind of create this national platform where they're telling their story of trauma to triumph their way. So and by the way, we'll include podcasts, which is launching next month. Next month is National Foster Care Awareness Month. So we'll have our website and our first podcast up and running from this national team. We have folks in Washington State and DC and Florida and Texas and folks from everywhere that are alumni that really want to be able to create this again, like a platform for alumni to share their full story their way, and it's their organization through the lens of Foster Strong. So I'll let Sean speak and jump in, because he's equally as passionate about Foster Strong.
Well, one of the things that struck me from my own experience going through the orientation and the classes and all that, I didn't really meet anybody who had been in foster care. In fact, I need to make sure that this is true, but I'm pretty sure I didn't meet the only place that I saw real kids from foster care was my wife and I. Before, it was after the classes, but before we had a placement, we started going to the support group meetings to just, it was recommended by the social workers to hear some of the experiences and that kind of thing. And at the end of the meetings, the kids would come down the kids would be upstairs during the meeting, and then the kids would all come down. And that was the first time I think my wife and I saw any official kids in foster care. And there's a line in the movie where the brother-in-law is kind of the voice of the naive on the outside, and
Tom Segura.
Yeah, Tom Segura, who was really funny in the movie. And he has this line where he says, "Oh, they just look like normal kids." And that's the experience that we had. It was all these kids coming down and just being like, "Oh, look at them. Oh, wow. They just look like regular kids," And so anyway, the point is that I started to realize that there's not enough involvement out there for foster alumni, in the training of the parents, even in, a lot of kids that are being brought into foster care for the first time, are being moved from place to place, all the things that they're going through. It's not that often that very many of them are getting advice or any kind of inspiration from people who've been in their shoes. So that's really our main goal here, is that we want people involved in the system, whether they're social workers or foster parents or potential adoptive parents or the kids themselves, to have access to people who've lived through this and have thrived and survived, so that they can see that this doesn't have to be the thing that everybody's tisking about and saying that this is sort of what your future holds. So what we're doing right now is we're putting together a podcast. We have this amazing group of young people, like Allison said, they're from all over the country. They are all incredible individually, and together they're going to be a force. And they're going to have this a weekly podcast where they are going to be. It's again, like the movie, it's not going to shy away from the trauma and the tragedy, but it's really going to be focused more on the triumph and more on what they're capable of and what they're doing now, and the positivity of who they are, and how they're just, that their foster care experience is a huge part of who they are, but it still doesn't define them. And then beyond that, we're putting together a series of videos where these young people are going to be speaking direct. This will be available on our website as well as YouTube and whatever, a series of short videos where they're going to be speaking to every, question that we can think of, to foster parents, to kids in care, where they can say, look, here, this was my experience. If you're just being brought into foster care and you're a teenager, this is what I went through, and this is what you can expect. And where they can speak directly, so that, and it came from my own simplistic thing that I'm really into. I was going to say woodworking, but I guess it's more like interior design and that kind of thing. And I do a little bit of plumbing and a little bit of wiring and all that. And I've learned it all on YouTube. And I love just getting on a video and hearing somebody else's experience. And that was sort of what gelled the idea for me, is that I thought, at the very least, people should have access to videos where they can hear somebody with real experience talking, who've been in their shoes. So anyway, that's kind of where it all started, and it's been slow coming together. It turns out it takes a lot to start a nonprofit.
Yeah,
So it's been a long year getting that together, but the podcast is, like she said, next month.
Well, I will download it and subscribe to it and listen to it as soon as it comes out, and share it. I think it's fantastic. You know, it resonates with me really, really deeply, and I'm seeing in the chat too some amens and thank you, and so I think it's resonating with people. But it resonates for me, Sean. I think Allison shared with you the documentary that I did from place to place, and that came from just a one conversation of a young guy that I was working with who was in foster care, had been for 7 years since his 11th birthday, and he was about to age out on his 18th birthday, and conversation, he just told me his story of what it was like to spend his entire teenage years in foster care, 17 different placements. And at the end of that, he said, you know, my life matters and people need to hear my story. And then what he said is, people don't listen, people don't know, people don't ask. And I think that's what you're getting at here, right? Like, I worry that we don't tell these stories enough. And then people don't know, and people aren't engaged, and people don't know how to plug in and how to be a part of the solution. And then when we do tell the story, sometimes you're right, we don't tell it the way that really is uplifting and empowering and, you know, authentic at the same time, with the challenges. And so I think we need more of that. And so whatever Foster Strong ends up doing with podcast and video and, you know, all kinds of content, I think it's necessary. I think it's something we really need to do. And you know, again, Children's Home Society is doing storytelling in a lot of different ways. I just watched a video this morning that we produced, actually about two of our foster parents and their story of shared parenting and reunification. And in the story is the birth mother and her daughter that they worked together with over about a year to help them reunify so that she could parent her daughter. I mean, brought tears to my eyes this morning. It was incredibly powerful. And so, you know, we are doing those kinds of things, and we're going to do more of that over time. And so as I hear you all talk, I'm thinking, well, as Foster Strong gets up and running, you know, Children's Home Society would want to be a partner to you guys in whatever way we can, because I think we need to get these stories out, and we need to tell them more. So.
And we're going to need that too. We're going to need the whole community to get the word out on this. And we are really right on the brink of. In fact, you know, I wanted to say we are in need of a little bit of internet website help, but what we're trying to do, so I literally used to design websites for a living, like, you know, 15 years ago. Turns out it's completely different now. So I've literally been working on the Foster Strong website myself and struggling with it. But a really important aspect of what we're trying to do with this is that you know, Allison alluded to this before, we don't want this to be another organization that's run by people, you know, social workers or people who are trying to do a good thing or whatever it is. Allison and I are helping out with this, but it's really the foster alumni that are in charge of it. And that when this podcast comes on, we have this amazing young woman named Carrie who lives in DC. She works as a lobbyist in DC, former foster youth, just amazing person. And I mean, I can't name them all, but we have so many people involved in this thing that are fantastic. But when you hear that podcast, it's coming directly from them. I mean, Allison and I are helping facilitate. I'm helping to get them some equipment and that kind of thing, but it's all them. So, for example, with this website, we ultimately want whoever's maintaining the site, we want it to be somebody who's a foster alum, you know, because we want this to be all their thing. And so I'm only mentioning it because if anybody knows any foster alumni who actually do some web design work, send them Allison's way.
Yeah.
And use them right about now, because I am struggling with this. I'm not going to lie to you. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if actually no, I see Melinda on here right now. I'm sure there are a number of alumni on right now, but I see Melinda, who works in our SASO program. So SASO is Strong Able Youth Speaking Out. It's one of the programs within Children's Home Society, and it's a youth-led program. It's 22 years old and going strong, and it does amazing work, all led by young people in the system. And so I don't know. I'm sure one of them is a web developer. Melinda or anybody, shoot me an email. Shoot Allison an email. Let's see if we can help Sean out with that. It's you have your hands full. You don't need to be developing websites right now.
I've already done a design that I really like, because that's really what more my area of expertise is
Yeah.
in the design and layout. But
Yeah.
I'm even doing this in WordPress, and it's just giving me, I'm pulling my hair out on it. But yeah, it's going to be such a huge part of what we're putting together. There was another thing I wanted to mention. Again, just talking about some of the young people that are involved. Mairead Green is a young woman who was Allison's counterpart on Instant Family. Mairead was another consultant who worked on the movie. Mairead, Allison had introduced us to her. She became our main influence for our Lizzie character, because Mairead, like Lizzie, was adopted as a teenager, went through a pretty tough transition with it, is doing great, is just graduating UCLA in a couple of months here. So congratulations to her, and is now working on Foster Strong. And we just had so many people. A young woman named Candy Daniels, who also played the nurse in the movie, who's now going to be a part of Foster Strong. So, this group, what when I got to know Mairead and Candy first, and then Carrie, and it's funny how we met Carrie. We were doing a screening at the Smithsonian at the Air and Space Museum in DC, and there was a big line of people, and I walked in, and Carrie just jumped out of line and just made a beeline to me and started telling me about everything that she was doing, and now she's become really instrumental in Foster Strong. And these are the kinds of people that we have involved with this thing already. So I think when this podcast comes on, you're going to love hearing from these people and getting to know them and hearing their voices and their stories, because they really are really inspiring young people.
I can't wait. Yeah, I can't wait. I feel like as a social worker, with a master's degree in social work and many years of experience, I learned the most and the best from people that have been through the experiences. And so the more we can get that out and accessible, I'm thinking about BSW students, MSW students. I mean, podcasts like be required listening for all social work students, for all professionals in the field. So I think it's great. We've been going for a while here, Allison. I think it's been a great conversation. We're still getting a lot of chats here, and I see Alex is saying thinkofus.org and Sixto cancel, and he's jumped in and said thanks, and so maybe he can help you out, Sean. He
Great.
does.
I wanted to
White House a while ago, so he might be your guy.
Cool. Fantastic.
Yeah.
I wanted to say, I gotta actually run here, but I wanted to say one thing that, and Allison's heard me say this 1,000 times when we were on the road with the movie, but just in terms of talking about story, when I think that sometimes people in the field, people that are drawn to this field are very conscientious just by nature. And it makes them feel like they have this obligation, and they do to some degree, like they have this obligation to make sure that everybody knows every possible negative thing that could come out of this. Like sometimes I feel like there is this sense to kind of lead with the negative, like, yes, it'd be great to have you in as a foster parent, but don't forget this could happen and that could happen and the other thing. And what I find, I've always sort of made this joke about that imagine if everybody that had biological kids, what do you hear from people that have biological kids? You hear like, oh my God, it's the greatest love ever. And you're like, you hear all the positive. You never really hear anybody say, yeah, we're thinking about having kids, but I don't know, maybe when the kid's a teenager, he's going to tell me to go fuck myself and then steal my car. Like you just never know that nobody, I think everybody that has biological kids know that they go through some really rough times with their own biological kids, but nobody leads with that when they're talking to people who might become potential parents. Yet in the foster care space, it seems like people tend to want to lead with, yes, we love that you're here and that you're interested, but don't forget all these horrible things that could come out of it. And look, I'm not saying that people should sugarcoat things. I think that people need to be informed absolutely about the trauma and the effects that can have and all of that. But I think that sometimes people forget, what a wonderful thing that they're bringing into people's lives as well. Not that they forget it, but that they, again, I think it just comes out of their own being conscientious. And I just think it's important for people to always make sure and weigh the positives with the negatives, and just make sure that people are also being reminded, because my own kids are the best thing that ever happened to me, period. And I've had like a lot of pretty good things happen to me. So.
That's right. No, it's a great message. I mean, it's a great point to end on. I mean, it's just a different kind of love, right? But it's unconditional, and that's the key. If you're going to come into this work, it's about, unconditional love, because there will be challenges, but that's what you do with your biological children. So that's what you do in this world too. So it's great. Yeah, we should move to wrap. Allison, I don't know if there's anything that you want to kind of close with, and then I can wrap us up.
Well, I just want to thank all the folks that are listening. It's been wonderful to read all the comments, and it's a great opportunity to have a broader conversation. I wish we could see all those faces and pull them into the conversation more, but I know that we're limited. So I want to thank Sean, I want to thank Matt and Children's Home Society, and for all the folks online, all the stakeholders, for just being passionate and interested in making a difference for vulnerable kids and families. So a big thank you, and stay tuned for Foster Strong's launch next month.
We can't wait.
Yes, thank you very much to everybody for all you do and for taking the time to listen to us today.
Yeah. No, thank you both very much for joining in. I'm gonna we did this morning, but I'd like to share just a quick story, kind of my own family story, to kind of close this up and kind of tie it back to what we're doing here today and in this week. But so Allison has heard this, but Sean, my grandfather is probably the most impactful, important person in my life, in my family or beyond my family. And he passed away a number of years ago, but left a legacy for me and for so many others. And so he was lived an amazing life. Part of it was a prisoner of war in World War II. And when he came out, he came back home and went to college, and decided he would he'd be a traveling salesman selling 2x4s. And so that's to start his career, and he fell in love with it, and decided that that's what he would do. He was in the wholesale lumber business his entire life, and it brought him everything for himself and for his family and for so many people, and took him and my grandmother all over the world, and it's a really amazing experience. And so he fell in love with trees, and he would sit at the table and talk about Radiata pine and start crying about it.
It sounds like my kind of guy, actually.
Oh, yeah, he was the best. He was the best. Just an amazing guy, and I could go on and on, but when he passed away, and we were doing his preparing for his funeral, and we were making up the funeral card that people would get in the church, and what we put on the back of it in quotes was the man who planted trees. And that's how we referred to him, because he was always planting trees everywhere he went. And he used to say to us that the true meaning of life was to plant trees under whose shade you never expect to sit. And that sticks with me, and I think about it all the time in our work, because what our job here is to do is to plant trees. We're going to do things for kids and families every day that we never know what the benefits might be. We may never see the results of the fruits of our labor, but we know what we're doing is helping other people. And that is the true meaning of life, and that's what he was trying to do. That's why he planted trees in so many different ways, and the legacy that he left that so many of us are carrying forward. And that's what Children's Home Society is really trying to do every day, just add value and improve the lives of kids and families and communities. And so to wrap up, that's what we're asking our supporters to do too. So this is our fundraising week. We're asking for you to plant trees for us as well. And you can do that at chsnc.org/stayhome. And Sean, you may not know this, but what we've done too is we're starting a family relief fund. So many of the families that we work with are being impacted by the coronavirus and financial stresses on their family. And so 25% of all the donations that come in this month will go to our family relief fund, and we'll be able to just distribute funds directly to families to help them go through what they're going through, just to give back and plant some more trees, basically. So we thank you all for being with us today. And Allison and Sean, thanks so much. I think this is hopefully just the start to a conversation. I hope we can keep it going and find ways to work together going forward. But it's just been great. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Sean. And thanks, Matt. We'll talk to you soon, okay?
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for staying tuned. Be safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.